Hello everyone, it's the Java programmer here again, and we're continuing on in the series of writing our ElasticSearch cluster client. And so in this video we are going to start a cluster. We are then going to add the dependencies we need in our POM file, and then we will write a ElasticSearch client. And that's probably all we'll be able to do in this video. And then in the next video, we will actually implement the cluster commands, cluster nodes, cluster list, and so forth, so that we can interact with the cluster. So the first thing we need to do is we need to start an Elasticsearch cluster. And so since the last video, I have refactored the code a little bit. I'll show that here briefly. So in our code base, I created a directory. I split out the commands into their own directories. So the config commands now are all under their own config directory, and the quit is under its own directory. And ESTop is something that I'm going to be working on outside of this video series. So that organized our files a little bit more. But what we want to do is we want to create a Docker file. So generally what I do is I'll make a directory called Docker. Inside of there, we will create a file called run cluster. And this is going to have some commands. And I'm going to bring in one command real quick here. So this is our command. So we're going to use a Docker to run our cluster. We're going to disable this parameter tells turn XPack security. We turn off having to require a username and password when we connect. These tell the these other options. Transport of 00 tells it to listen on all interfaces so that it can receive connections from the outside. We have our cluster initial nodes. You'll see here in a second how we name these. So this one's node name is node name 01. And down here we also give it a Docker name of ES01. This is all in a way to get the, and you can see the port number here is 2201 instead of 2200, which is the normal Docker port. So because we're going to run multiple nodes, we have to separate these out so that they don't conflict with each other when we're running them. And so if we run this, assuming you have Docker running, I have Docker running, have some other containers that are currently stopped, so we'll just ignore those for now. Let's turn our cluster into, and if you don't have the image, it'll automatically pull it. Okay, now that the image has been pulled and our 4 nodes have started right here, here's the 4 different IDs. We do a docker ps-a. We will see up here, I'm going to make this just a bit bigger, we have our 4 nodes running. Now we're going to use our connection in Java to determine if this cluster is up, but I just want to check. If you do a docker logs-f es01, we should see here where this is node 1, and we should see that it's attempting to connect to the cluster. There we go. We see a node 2 connected into node 1. So it looks like our cluster is now up and running. So next we need to add our dependencies into the POM file here. And so we need to add 2 different Elasticsearch dependencies. We will add them right here. One of them is the Elasticsearch client libraries, and the other one is a Jackson data bind. So here are our two. So we have the Elasticsearch clients, the Elasticsearch Java client, and the Jackson, which is usually used for serializing and deserializing JSON. So these are our two libraries. So now let's go and create a client. So I may need to move things around a little bit. When we were looking at our config commands, we put the config helper here in the config command, and I think I'm going to have to put it up one level higher because I want to use the config helper to actually produce our Elasticsearch client. So now that we've figured out level, we are going to use that class. This guy, we need to move up a level to right here. So he's going to be at a high level. Actually, I'm going to put him in a class called in a directory called utils, because we're going to actually put several things in there. So we're going to put this guy in there. We're going to put our command processor in there, and we are going to have a Elasticsearch client that we also put in there. So okay, so let's create our Elasticsearch connection. So I think we'll create a class called just that, Elasticsearch connection. So Elasticsearch connection. And in here, we're going to have a few things. So first off, we need a Elasticsearch client, which is going to be this guy. This is our connection to Elasticsearch. We'll have our default constructor, Elasticsearch connection, and that's going to take in a string host and integer port. This will be coming in from the config helper. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're going to allow the config to pass in multiple hosts in the hosts parameter, and then we'll ignore the port. What we'll do is the port and the host name will be put together in this host string, and they will become separated. In our case, we're connecting to a cluster, so we're going to have 4 nodes we're trying to connect to. However, if it's a single node, then we will just use the host. So now I'm going to go and build out the client. All right, there we have it. We've built out our Elasticsearch client. Now, what we want to do is we want to add a couple methods. One is to close the client, and one is to be able to use the client. So I'm going to write those now. All right, so there we have it. There's our client. We set it up by passing in some parameters, and then we create a getter method and a close method. And so now we are going to implement this over in the config helper, because the config helper is going to hold a connection to the client. So inside the config helper, we are going to need this variable class that we just created. So call it ESConnection, and then down here we want to set up the ES connection. You'll see why we do this in a moment, and the reason why we do this separately is because if for some reason in the middle, if you want to change your config, we need a way to be able to reset the connection so that it uses the new configuration parameters that may have been passed in. So in this case, host and port, we're going to grab those out of our config map, config.get, es.host, host singular, and config.get es.port. Now you notice these are objects, so we're going to have to cast them to the correct things that the client is looking for. So there we go. We've set up a connection. We also want a very similar method for when we load a new configuration. And we're not going to implement it. We're going to have the method here, but we're not going to implement this in this video. We'll do it in another video. But we're going to call reset connection. And what this is going to do is we're just going to call ESConnection dot close first, and then we will get a new connection. That way we can reset it, and if the values in our map in our config map may have changed, then we will reinitialize our connection to the server. So and one last thing we need here is we need to actually create a method so that this client, the client can get used later on in our commands. So get ES client, this is not going to be our connection, but the client that's inside the connection. So return ESConnection dot get client, and that's it. So that's all for this video. In the next video we are going to implement our cluster commands. So thanks for watching, and I hope you find this series informative. If you'd like, I'd greatly appreciate it if you could star my GitHub repository and like my videos. That'd be great. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.